Welcome to the Woodlands Water Agency Board of Trustees meeting for August of 2023. Going to call this meeting to order and begin with a roll call. Bob Lux, Mud 60 is here. Ron Wilson, we have an alternate.
Harry Alcott.
Harry Alcott is here. Kyle Mays.
Here.
Mud 7. Paul Martin.
Here.
Hartley McIntosh.
Here.
Neil Gaynor.
Here.
Jan Price.
Here.
Ted Stanley. Ted is not here at this time. No alternate has been sent. David Smith.
Here.
Good evening. And Hugh Conant has an alternate.
Craig Ricard.
Craig Ricard. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll begin with an opening invocation and pledge of allegiance. Heavenly Father, we come to you today as an assembled body. We humbly request that you bless our meeting, our community, and our nation. Help us to work diligently, always for the common good and in the best interest of those who we have been elected to represent. Guide us to be insightful and prudent in our intentions, visions, plans, deliberations, discussion, and their fulfillment. Work through us to provide a spirit of welcome to all in attendance. Engage in respectful and thoughtful dialogue and discussion with understanding, wisdom, and humility. Amen. If you wish, prior to reciting the pledges of allegiance, take an additional moment of silent prayer or additional reflection in the manner of your preference. Thank you. Pledge of allegiance to the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to these Texas, one state under God, one indivisible.
Amen. Thank you. Okay. Receive comments from the public. We have Mr. Maggart has requested to speak. 3 minutes, if you'd be so kind, please, sir.
Wanted to expand. Chris Meeks was up here last week, and as a result of all these studies, they determined that wastewater treatment plant 1 has plenty of capacity. You missed that. So there's no reason for expansion. The other issue that's been going on for years is peak flow. I sent you a letter, most of you here, but anyway, the peak flow issue has been resolved technically, but Woodlands Water has decided they weren't going to implement the recommendations on covering up all of the manhole covers. But what I want to point out is you've got a wastewater treatment plant. I was on this board, a 36 board for 12 years. I looked at the volumes every day. And wastewater treatment plant's kind of interesting. I got on the board in 2006, and there were 3 million gallons a day going through that plant. Today, there's 3 million gallons a day going through that plant. And we've had all this construction, Hughes Landing, over in the waterway and all these apartments. So it's kind of an interesting problem. But what I want to talk about is the plant itself. And I want to talk about BOD. That is not BBD, underwear, but BOD is biochemical oxygen. And that's the number one thing they're trying to get rid of in a processing plant. That is the measure of how much chemical demand you got in the effluent going out of your plant. And that is reported every month by the River Authority. And what I suggest is that we all get a report of the biochemical demand in the effluent for the last 5 years. I watched it every time. And I got a lot of faith in Chris and his group that I don't even have to look at it, that it's way below the PECQ maximum. It used to be by a factor of 25% of the maximum out. So you got a plant that's designed for 7.8 million gallons a day. The process is 3. And you got a proposal before you. And the only thing I've looked at technically, I'm an engineer, and I don't think something being old is a technical reason to say we need to junk it and spend $250 million to put a new one in. And just to give you, most of you have seen, I call them swimming pools for bacteria. There's huge 3 circular tanks out there. And basically, you could take one of those out of service at any time. You got 7.8 million gallons a day of capacity. You can take one out of service and completely refurbish it, one of it. That's probably the biggest piece of equipment that you got. And you could do that over a period of time. In fact, I've been out there myself and seen one of them empty. So obviously they have rehabbed them over a period of time. And I agree 100% that periodically you have to rehab. But I think that this board, and hopefully you will go back to your individual directors and explain to them, I calculated, I used for 226 million, got 5% interest amortized for 30 years. Your sewer's charge is $5.53 right now. It has to go to $12 just to amortize the debt if you build a new plant. Now, I came up here the first time and I asked, has anybody explained to your constituents how much it's going to cost? Anybody seen a number? 226 million. I had to go to the dog and pony show up at the convention center to find out what the number was. 226 million. That's just for the plant. That doesn't include all the lift stations. So I'm here tonight, and the last time I got passionate about something was when the River Authority tried to create a regional water district run by the River Authority by statute. And almost everybody endorsed it. Well, fortunately, that didn't happen. You can see what's going on in Northwest Harris County. You got 3 regional water districts. Their surface water conversion fee now was $5. Fortunately, they people are elected. They threw the guys out, and the first thing they did was cut their surface water fee 50 cents.
Summarize, please, sir. In 5 minutes.
Bob, I'll summarize. I was on the board for 12 years. You get very few citizens that come up here and make a statement. First thing I did when I was on the board is I waived that rule. But anyway, I'll leave. But believe me, y'all will hear from me again. And whether it's at the township or at the River Authority, but hopefully you all will take a look at this proposed expenditure and explain to them why we need to take a plant that's got plenty of capacity and completely junk it and put another one in for $250 million. Thank you.
Thank you for your information, insights. Okay. That takes care of public comments. We move to Region H update. Mr. Bredhoff.
Good evening, Mr. President, trustee, senior staff, and residents. Region H did have its meeting, its quarterly meeting in August 2nd, and we took a number of actions according to our timeline to stay on track for the 26 to 31 regional. First action we took, we made a minor adjustment to our current plan. Our current plan is 2021 to 26. we had a request by the Lower Natchez Valley Authority to make a minor adjustment and submit that to the Texas Water Development Board. That adjustment they requested was to upgrade some infrastructure so that they could get the full pumping capacity out of their canal that supports farming. They had some very old equipment that the level of capacity was continuing to decline over time. And they were also very fortunate that the Texas Water Development Board has approved SWIFT funds so that they could finance that infrastructure. So that was a good minor adjustment to our plan, and it moved today's reality. Second thing we worked on our population and municipal demand projections. They're due on the 14th of August. We're on track and we did approve those. Part of the approval of that, we increased our water demands by population by 25% over our current plan. For 15 counties, we have 368 water user groups. By 2030, these 15 counties will comprise 8 million people. By 2080, we project we're going to have 9.2 million people in 15 counties. So it's the great thirst. On our next quarter, we're going to be working on both groundwater, surface water, and other water sources. How do we meet this demand? When you take a look at what's important to us near and dear here, Montgomery County, by 2030, we should be about 783 million people. And by 2080, we should be about 1.4 million. So this is a substantial growth that this county is under, and plus the rest of these 15 counties. As we know, Harris County is in part of this point of this, but it's, when you look out there, there's a lot of thirst. So we got to find water, and it's just not finding water sources. We have to look at conservation. So we're taking all of these into our planning, and we're using dry seasons. We're not using wet seasons in our planning. And we're also going to be looking at uncertainties. What are some of the uncertainties we need to be putting into our planning? We've got a great consultant that works on a lot of detail. And just to give you an idea about the demand, the projected municipal demand, at 2030, we think it's going to be about 1.39 million acre feet per year. And if you project that out to 2080, we think the demand's going to grow up to 700 million acre feet per year by 2080. So you can see the demand is great. And then the real question is, where do we get the supply? So that's part two that we have to work on. But we're on track on our projections. The other thing that helps with this planning is an inter-regional council, and that's all 16 regions that the chairman of each planning group, they meet on a quarterly basis. They exchange best practices, and the next meeting is August the 15th. All of this is on our website. And then that interregional council will report out to the Texas Water Development Board by March of 2024, recommendations, best practices. So this is pretty integrated as far as planning from the local to the regional level, all the way up to the Texas Water Development Board. There is a representative that the Texas Water Development Board assigns to each region. So there's continuity in planning, and we know what the state level is doing. It's really interesting how detailed this planning is and what you really take a look at. Next big timeline is we've got a meeting either in October or November of 23. And then by March 24, we have to have our technical memo prepared and ready, drafted, so we can review that, because our draft plan has to be ready by March 25. And then by October of 25, the final plan, after it goes through a public hearing, has to be at the Texas Water Development Board by October 25. So it's ready to be approved, uploaded to the state, and it's ready for 26 to 31. A full copy of our packet from the August meeting, Shelley is ready uploaded onto the Google Drive, so everybody has all of that detail. It's quite detailed, but I try as best to give you a summary and give you an idea about what we're working on and what are some of the impacts to us here in Montgomery County.
Thank you for that comprehensive report, Arthur. Very well.
Okay, Representative.
It's a daunting task that's facing us.
It is, and
Demand is like off the charts.
it is, and you get to see water in a different way when you're in a planning group and you're working with a consultant that's trying to tabulate all this. And you think about how many water users are in just our region H with a 15 county area, what the impacts are. And some of the demand may lessen because of changing in jobs. You know, we're very oil dependent, but as we go out to 2080, there may be less oil jobs, but more different kind of jobs. You're also seeing in a lot of these counties that were rural at one time that depended upon irrigation, agriculture, cattle. Those are changing. So you take a look at Liberty County. Those counties are starting to shrink and become more urbanized. Look at our county, how urbanized our county's getting to be. So these all impact demand for water, but I call it the great thirst. So we got to find water.
Thank you again, Eric.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, guys.
Excellent. We're now to the consent agenda. Review and act on the minutes of the board meeting of July of 23 and financial disbursements of July of 23, pages 1 through 13 of our meeting packet.
Second.
We have a motion. We have a second discussion. Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you. Regular agenda. Agenda item number 7, review the draft Woodlands Water Financial Fiscal Year 2024 operating budgets and capital budgets. I believe that's in the amendment to the meeting packet.
Copies. I think everybody, that we're looking for this.
Yeah.
And then it looked like them up.
Right. You, Maureen, Eric, are you gonna?
Sure. So this is the draft budget, for 2023-24. This is, we're not taking action on this tonight. This is just, we'll take action on it next month. But I want to take the opportunity to go through the draft budget with you. There's obviously a lot of line items and a lot of things on here, but I wanted to touch on some of the highlights. The first page of the spreadsheet looking paper is the revenue side. And the summary on the revenue side is essentially the revenues going up from 10,000,003 to 10,000,004 to 12,600,000. The majority of that is really in the pass-throughs from the MUDs for a couple different large projects. The sanitary sewer project, several million, large ditch repair, and then Bear Panther. Those are some of the main bigger items in the TAN area. Keep in mind, the TAN area is projects that or expenses that would come back in, so through revenue through the MUDs. So on the other side, the next page is the expense side. As I highlighted, those corresponding increases are the same on the expense side. Overall expenses go from 10,000,023 to 12,100,000. And again, that's corresponding to those prep through projects that I just mentioned for the most part. In addition to that, some new budget items that in looking at the budget I threw in. One is to address some things with this building. I put $100,000 into the budget, 50 to address, and it won't be 50 and 50, but I've currently split it up 50 for improvements for a lot of things. And some of the main issues that we need to address with the building. There's leaks and mold and things like that we need to address.
Where is that shown, sir? Please.
It's not a specific
Okay.
separated line item.
Okay.
It is.
Consultant fees, 7,200.
Say again, please.
Under professional fees, consultant fees is 50, and then the building repairs 9240.
9240.
There you go.
Correct.
So 50, and she just mentioned it, the other half is consultant fees. The thought there is, and I'm working with Howard Hughes right now to talk through the long-term planning for this area to see what the ideas are there. But the thought is the other half would be utilized to bring in a architectural consultant to talk through kind of how we would maybe, if there's nothing, this building is 40 years old. It needs some work. It needs to be modernized. There's a lot of problems with a lot of things. But if the long-term play is a few years, or the short-term play is only a few years, then probably makes sense to not basically just do the bare minimum that we need to until a potential change might happen. If it's a longer-term play, then we need to do some work here. Probably. I'd like to move this room or enlarge it so we don't have all that going on. I'd like to do a lot of other things to modernize this. But again, that's kind of what I'm working on. So I have 50 to bring in a consultant to help us kind of plan that out if we need it, and then 50 to actually do some improvements. And that might move those two numbers, but overall 100. I put in another 100 and this was kind of before I heard what you're about to hear with the SQA AC water line. We have our own water lines within WWA and the MUDs that we need to start assessing on the AC side. And so I've put in $100,000 in the budget to look at some proactive condition-based assessment of those lines. That might get us maybe 8 to 10 a year, maybe 8 to 12 digs, pulling a pipe, sending off for testing, that type of thing. So that's just a kind of a line item right now that I'm contemplating, depending on what direction the trustees want to go with a condition-based assessment of their lines. And then it was mentioned earlier from the gentleman that there's, and then last month it was mentioned that there was an I&I study years ago, actually put in some money in the budget to address the low-lying manholes and put in flow protectors in those. It was about 9,000, wasn't a lot. We'll get about 100 or so manholes addressed. We're not going to address the ones that are up on hills and most likely aren't being inundated with flood waters, but put some money in there. And then the other item that I added was with all the momentum that we have going on with the PEC and our community outreach, and with the fact that we're going to be partnering with SGRA on the public relations firm that's about to be selected. I'll put in an additional 15,000 in the budget for that. And then some modifications to how we're reaching the public right now with our strategic communication plan. So those are kind of some of the highlights. The end result is the admin fee is reduced and goes down from $7.18 to $7. So we're actually reducing the admin fee, which is a plus. So those are kind of the highlights.
If, you said it was a short and long-term view for this building. What would make it a short view?
If they're ready to go.
What's that?
If Howard Hughes perhaps is ready to go,
Ready to go where?
ready to develop this area.
So, if we would leave, who owns the building?
We own the building. We own the building and they gifted the land. So they have the first right of refusal.
Usually if we decide to move.
Correct.
So is that being discussed?
What?
In us moving? Us giving the land back to you?
Not specifically, and I don't know if this is something that we really need to talk about in open session or not. For property.
Yeah.
So.
We just need to have a closed session. Hear that?
We don't have that on the.
Not on the agenda.
So you put it on next month. And I mean, I see some repairs, stealing files, but it's.
Yes,
It-
trustee.
If I could just give you a short history. This building was it's designed by Taft Architects and they got a article in Time magazine showing about how wonderful these buildings were. And they had a very special air conditioning heating system that blew up. And then we had to go to these air conditioners because the system they had was no good. And they installed the windows backwards, so we had to do a considerable amount of work on all the windows here. And poor Gordon Munson was our interim general manager when all this happened. And we took immediate action to get the new air conditioner and to get the windows done. But the windows have never been properly put in. And so we continue to have this kind of stuff all the time. And thank you for putting it in the budget. Maybe we'll get a handle on it this time.
Amen.
But the developer had their eye on this building for some time, and part of trying to get us to become a city was that they were going to move us to the city hall and take over this. And we were going to have to move to the city hall because, of course, all the MUDs would come under the city. And the developer hasn't stopped sniffing at wanting our area because it's very valuable. And as you know, they're going to get a trade on the activity center and the library and Grogan's Mill, and that's a whole nother story. But the developer is really trying hard to get all the development land that is next to the waterways.
Is, have you heard the Commissioner Court has voted on that? About the swap of land between the county? You know if they actually voted on that swap? I've heard the story, but I haven't heard.
I don't have specific information on that.
I understand is they're close, really close.
Really close.
Yeah. And it looks favorable.
What's that?
It looks like it's gonna happen.
And as the other town centers collapse, the developer will probably do that with something to get those also. For example, there's no grocery store in Grogan's Mill. There's no grocery store in Panther Creek. There's no drug store in Cochran's Crossing, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you.
That's just an aside. Thank you for giving me the time.
Anything else, Sarah?
Now, if you have any questions during this next month, give me a call. I'll walk you through it. But those were the highlights.
Thank you.
Looks good, and I think we got to compliment. You know, we have fewer staff than when we built this building. And we had, at that time, 15,000 people in the Woodlands. And we have fewer staff now. But a big compliment to the people who run this outfit for us. They're very efficient, and they've been very efficient.
Very competent staff. Thank you again. Agenda item 8. Receive regular monthly SJRA Woodlands Division report, including updates on operation, projects, and public outreach, pages 14 through 21 of our meeting packet. Oh, Mr. Shackelford, good evening.
Chris would be here, but he is down with COVID.
Oh.
And he's not enjoying it. So I'm pinch hitting, and I hope you're not going to ask too tough of questions because I haven't really studied the operations report. But if you look at page 14, I've just outed myself. Groundwater is up around 55%. Surface water is around 45%. Remember, the annual blend is 50-50. A lot of that has to do with the surface water plant is producing roughly around 22 to 25 million gallons a day right now. And we're sending about 10 of it down south. So you're making up the balance with groundwater. You'll go to page 15. You can kind of see where production is. If you'll go to the far right side of the bottom of the page, that green bar gives you August 2023 volumes for the month. And the actual numbers are at the top of the page. And the wastewater is on page 16. And it kind of gives you an idea of where the volumes are currently. We have had no rain, we've had no I&I. So we're still around 3 million gallons at the plant 1, and then 3.5 at plant 2. Everything is working. I haven't heard of any breaks or anything that's calling our folks out. So things are going along pretty well for hot summer months. Right.
How's the drought affecting groundwater?
It's up.
So
It's probably up across the board. We see, we know what's going on here in the Woodlands. We see a little bit of what's happening in Conroe. Their volumes are up. You remember they got fined for overpumping last summer. We got fined for overpumping this last summer. A number of entities got fined for overpumping last summer. There were some people that were able to go in and amend their permits for this year. We were one of them. We're doing everything we can to stay within the permit limits.
how's that gonna, you had budget problems in the past. How's that helping you?
Quite honestly, the more groundwater that gets pumped, the more cash infusion into our revenue accounts. So last summer we picked up about 15 million from overpumping, which really helped the equation. I haven't seen what the numbers are so far, but our last report to the GRP review committee is everybody was still within their allocations. And that was not the case at the end of July 2022.
I've been a good contributor. I've been making up for it.
Haven't we all?
Anything on operation? I'm also number 9.
Yes. Do we have a handout for that? For number 9?
No, you've had, we've given you the budget 2 months ago. We asked if there were any questions 2 months ago and last month. My understanding is I'm not aware of any questions on the budget, but just to refresh memories, GRP fee is staying flat, no increase. The wholesale water rate is going up about 5 cents, so about 2%. So it's going to 278. The wastewater fee is going to 565. That's about a 12-cent increase, but it's still in the 2% range.
Yeah, and it was an agenda item for each MUD,
Correct.
as you remember. So the trustees are supposed to have gotten instructions as to whether they want to approve or disapprove or ask questions for the agenda item this month, which is approval. And I so move.
We have a motion, we have a second. Discussion,
This is to approve the
CRA Woodlands Division budget.
Division budget.
without capital.
Correct. It has 6 million in there for the R&R fund. Yeah.
Further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll report that at our board meeting later this month.
Thank you. Receive updates on Spring Creek distension study. Dan, hello, Dan, good evening.
Evening, everybody. So I'll keep this one short because we do have some longer presentation coming up here in a few minutes. On Spring Creek, nothing really to update of significance beyond the last meeting where, trying to continue discussions with the solar company and setting up meetings with local elected officials to discuss the project. So the next real major milestone is in that March, April timeframe next year is going to be the next public meeting that we're kind of hosting for that. That's it on Spring Creek.
Questions for Dan regarding Spring Creek? Thank you, Dan. Agenda item 11, receive updates on wastewater strategic plan.
So on the wastewater side, we are progressing with our consultant on the phase 2 planning efforts. They have a lot going on, working towards a lot of the site planning, master planning type piece of it, talking to some vendors, getting updated cost estimates. So really it's working towards the next All Mud meeting, which is October 24th. Again, that'll be an evening meeting hosted at our Woodlands office, but that is where we plan on presenting kind of the master planning work, followed by updated cost estimates for the facility. What we will not have at that point in time is the rate impact piece of it. So that rate impact piece is going to be at the third planned All Mud meeting in the December timeframe. So you will get an updated picture on the overall cost, but we will be working internally and with a consultant between October and December meeting to really define some of those rate charts and update them from the phase 1 plan. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on wastewater stuff.
Questions for Dan regarding the wastewater strategic plan? Good job. Thank you, sir. Agenda item 12, consider an act on additional research for San Jacinto River Authority for the AC water lines. I believe that Connie Curtis will be, and Dan will be. Oh, excuse me. Thank you.
Remembering your eyesight. Get
I was gonna say, watch out.
There you go.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you.
You're okay.
All right. Are we good with lights on or lights off or?
Yeah, let's hit the light.
There we go. All right. Yep, my thing works, so we're ready to go. Thank you all so much for having us here this evening. As y'all know, I'm Connie Curtis with the SRA, and this is my partner in crime here, Dan Hildebrandt. So we've got a presentation for you this evening. We're going to run through a handful of things. So we're going to go through a bit of the project plan background. So we bring you a 10-year project plan every year. We're going to talk a little bit about how we got where we did on the water lines, just so that everybody here is on the same page as much as we can be. We're going to go over condition-based asset management, have a discussion over a lot of the things we've looked at since about April. And then we've got some recommendations to talk about today, and then some next steps that we're proposing. So Dan's going to take the first half of this, and then you're going to get to hear from me on the back end.
And I just kind of want to reiterate, like what Connie's saying, this is really a culmination of the discussions that we've had, the input we've gotten over the past few months of discussing the AC water line program. A couple months ago, I think 2 months ago, we came to you with a technical memo with a couple different options on there and costs associated with them for additional analysis. I just wanted to remind everybody of that. That was additional kind of more desktop type analysis, utilizing existing data that we have. Also looking at kind of a further in-depth analysis of maybe consequence of failure, what businesses or areas our lines serve, and then a third option of going into more utilizing some predictive modeling softwares on our existing data. We came to you, and SRA's recommendation on those was not to proceed with those options. So what this is really kind of a next level of how do we collect more data to make a true significant condition assessment program. So that is what tonight's on, is more diving into a larger condition-based asset management program. So with that, I think we go next slides. The project background. So, for some of y'all that haven't, are more new to the buds and to the trustees, we wanted to go back a little bit to give you the history of how we got to this point where we are today. So in 2017, 2018 timeframe, this is when SRA recognized that we have aging infrastructure, approaching that 50 years where we really did need to start thinking about replacing these lines. So SRA embarked on an internal analysis with our technical services department, our engineers, project managers, and working with the Woodlands Division operations. And we pulled our break history, we pulled the information on the age of our existing pipelines, we pulled any information we had related to the pipeline installation. We did a analysis on what facilities our lines served, whether it was a small section of a neighborhood, a large neighborhood, critical care facilities, to really look into, what would the consequence of failure be if one of our lines had a break. And at that point in time, we also identified a service life expectancy to the best of our ability, which is that 50-year number that's been thrown around a lot. We did do some internal cost estimating. And at that point in time, it was approximately around $100 million estimated to replace the AC water lines here in the Woodlands. So we went through that effort, prioritized a replacement phasing plan, and that was in 2018 was the first year that we started showing AC replacement projects in our 10-year project plan.
I think one thing to note here is the first time that you would have seen the water lines was in that 2018 plan. But the first time you would have seen the water lines need any investment was 2021 when Town Center started design. So in that 2018 plan, the first water line showed up in 2021. So just for reference.
So moving on to 2019, 2020 timeframe, this is when we acknowledge this is going to be a significant investment, hundreds of millions of dollars. So we started discussions and conversations with the audit committee regarding financing, in conversations with the management trustee on planning for this large future investment. During that time frame, we were updating our 10-year project plan on an annual basis and making small adjustments to replacement costs based on just the inflation at that time. And by 2020, costs went up a little bit to around $109 million. Progressing on to 2021. So this was much closer to when we were starting to initiate the program. And this is like Connie mentioned, when we initiated a consultant, getting them on board to start the design for the Town Center waterline project, which currently today is around, say, 90% design package. We also hired a consultant to come in and evaluate our internal analysis that we did on the prioritization. So we had a consultant that developed a 20-year capital improvement project plan for the entire SRA Woodlands water system. That effort was approximately around $120,000. They were looking really at the age of the pipeline, the break data, and those are kind of the metrics that were utilized to develop a likelihood of failure. They also looked at our internal analysis on the consequence of failure side. So they went in and also updated the replacement costs. So this is a significant jump based on the consultant and the information they had. That total replacement cost estimate rose to about $149 million to replace the AC water lines. And there was also additional projects within the 20-year window, but really within that 10-year plan is what was presented and recommended by the consultant to replace the AC water line packages.
So one thing I want to know, Dan noted this, from 100 to 109 to 149 over a 2 to 3 year period. Just to be honest, SRA has really never had to replace a water line before. So internal staff at that time didn't have a lot of resources to pull from. So they were making some estimates that probably were too low. Honestly, one of the reasons we brought LAN in to do the study was to confirm that our numbers were correct. We did feel like they were low. Post-COVID, the 2020 timeframe, there has been significant escalation in construction costs. And so we can see that again as we move forward here into 2023 and the numbers jump again. It does seem like it's progressing up. That's sort of what's happening in the industry. But I will also say we're drilling down further and further into the projects and identifying more of the reality of what they're going to be with every step that we're going. So I think we're getting closer to what we really can expect. So just wanting to note that here.
So coming out of that consultant report was the recommendation for replacing 48 miles of the asbestos cement pipelines. And there was 11 proposed water replacement projects. So don't need to read what's on the screen. You have a handout, 11 by 17 handout of the map. And those are the individual 11 packages that came out of that project plan.
And we can put this on the Google Drive if y'all want to look at it
Yeah.
more in depth.
I guess, yeah, that was one thing I did forget to mention. So we handed this out to y'all tonight. For the individual MUD meetings, it will be included on the Google Drive and in your packet. So that has been passed down to Shelley. Fellow MUD director will be able to see that prior to next week. Also coming out of that plan was this table. I think we have presented this a little bit before. I didn't really want to go into all the numbers tonight and the breaks and trying to further analyze this regarding, you could look at metrics on the length, the total length of each one of these segments versus the number of breaks. But really, this is the prioritization that came out of that plan, some basic information on the year installed, the replacement year, and the age at replacement. We just wanted to provide that to you in this presentation. That's what that is.
So 2023, here we are.
So 2023, over this, during the first quarter of 2023, when we were putting together our proposed 10-year project plan, we acknowledged the escalation, the rate of escalation on the construction side, the raw materials. So we engaged a consultant to, again, further look at our replacement cost, and we engaged a consultant that was designing town center water line replacement and also other number of water line replacement projects within the general region, and felt they were the most qualified and had the best information on cost data to update our plan. So that 149 million has jumped up to 200 million based on the latest revised estimates that we have received from consultants.
The other thing I want to note on that, just to pause for a second, the LEN is still a planning level document, so you're not really drilling down and looking at the realities of how often are you going to bore, how many driveways are there, where are you going to potentially pipe burst versus an open cut. And all of that was something that we did task that other consultant in the first quarter to kind of look at, because they were doing town center. They kind of understood what our design standards were, and they could understand of looking at the specific projects that we were asking them and kind of apply, all right, count the number of driveways. Let's assume that those are going to be either bored or not bored based on what we just went through. And so that's another reason that this has gone up. Construction method was actually taken into consideration on many of those projects. So just note that as well. The further we drill down, the better results we're going to have.
So in April, we presented that 10-year project plan with the updated costs. And in July here, we have received and reviewed the 90% final design package for the town center water line.
The one thing that I want to just stop here and pause, the audit committee, I believe it was in the, if Chris was here, he could really tell us, but that 2018, 2019 timeframe, there was a request to bring not just one project at a time. So don't just identify town center as the most necessary. Bring us a kind of package where we can see what's happening. And so that's really where this 10-year water program kind of came from, was, okay, we're going to do our best to bring you the best information that we have. And what we know is that every year something's going to break and it's going to be a little different. We'll put it back into the hopper. We'll reprioritize. So the plan was always that we're going to bring you a 10-year project plan with the best projects we know that are the highest priority, but we're going to continue to evaluate and continue to update that, asking for funding as we get closer to the ones that we need. So with town center, we asked for design fees, then we're asking for construction fees. So it's not going to be one big request at a time unless y'all choose to do it that way. So right now, we've paid for the design of town center. The next thing we're going to ask for is the construction cost. So just know that that was the plan going into the background. That's how we've ended up where we are today. And we're going to pause here and ask if y'all have any questions. Yes, sir.
So go back to the LNR slide. We have that.
The LEN?
LEN.
Which one?
Go back one more, that one. So, I've read that document. And when you talk about all the technical data in this document, it's all missing. Meaning the only statement in that document is that SJRA provides a 50-year life. There's nothing else in that document. I've read it, 39 pages. So you paid $120,000 where you provide the fundamental guidance for their decision making. And the engineer states that you provided the 50-year life. So where did the 50-year life come from? Since it came from you without the consultant recommending it.
So Mr. Smith, the best understanding that I have of where that 50-year came from is there are some documentations from around the 2015 to 2016 timeframe where EPA states that it's a 50 to 70-year life cycle for AC pipe. And 50-year being conservative, so us wanting to maintain a high level of service for the Woodlands, we made the assumption of 50 years.
So
And that was a part of
you're
what.
a member of AWWA, right? SJRA is a member of AWWA, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so AWWA basically says this pipeline has an 80 to 100-year life. 80 to 100-year life. You mean? And they also have benchmarking data. You mean? So I'd like to know, what is your breakage per 100 miles? So you want to replace all this pipe. So, and you say it has problems. But when I did the Freedom of Information Act requesting all the breakage data, you gave me 8 years worth. You know what I mean? And you said you didn't have any location data. You know what I mean? And then 2 days later, you show that chart that Ed Meeks put together, which has, some locations. So, I did the calculation. I know what the breakage for 100 miles, based on the data you provided, which you said was all the data we had. And then, you went back and got that other chart, put another chart up there. One more, right there. Is that it? Yeah. So you dragged that out. You went back 20 years, 17 years. You
This
found
is all the data we have. Yes, sir.
That's it right there.
Yes, sir.
That's all the data you have. And that's the problem. You brought to this committee, right, requesting for a lot of money, 180, 195 million, and you had no data to support those decisions. None. And that's why we're in this hole right now, because the AWWA says 80 to 100. I have another Mesa Waterworks I've given you, and that's 140. And I know what their breakage per 100 miles is.
So Mr. Smith, I know you're upset.
So I'm not upset. I'm just, you guys are stuck on this 50 miles and you want the Woodlands to spend $180 million. And these people worked hard for that money.
So Mr. Smith,
And
can
you
we
don't have an ounce of data to support the 50 miles.
Can we
Go ahead.
continue forward? And we have a whole presentation to present today about a potential recommendation. So bear with us. We're coming to it.
Was there any other questions on the background or?
The cost for the water lines, is it specific to each mud? Okay. And I would just share that being in the metro, that we feel like our constituency is different than residential, and that, the priority, I see that it looks like we've already paid 90% of the design costs.
Town center.
Yes, for town center.
That's already been allocated. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so I guess the next piece for us is going to be actually to fund it,
For the construction.
the construction, right? I know you all have had conversations with Ron, I guess, before about as you pull up pieces of the line to be able to inspect that line, to understand a little bit about
You'll see.
the life of this line, as we're expecting your 50 years, 80 years, 100 years. Okay.
Absolutely.
We're
Okay.
gonna present on some more of that. So
Okay.
sit tight. Let's keep going. Any other questions? Sorry, before we.
So moving into what would a condition-based asset management, program look like potentially for us? And this is really specifically tying into the asbestos cement water pipe. That is really kind of the higher priority. I do want to acknowledge that we have a lot of PVC pipe in the ground too, to where if we get through the asbestos cement, the older pipe, there may be a need for a condition assessment program on the PVC and other pipe materials further down the road. So just keep that in mind, but tonight really focusing on the AC piece. So condition-based asset management, since April 2023, when we started these discussions with y'all, we have reviewed a number of engineering articles, some that we have found, some that consultants have provided, some that y'all have provided us. There is a lot of information out there. We've discussed approaches to condition-based programs with multiple national experts, consultants on what they have done in the local region, what they've done nationally, and other entities that are in a similar situation to us to get a picture of what a condition-based program may look like for us. We've discussed destructive and non-destructive testing approaches with a number of vendors. So just in the past couple of weeks, we've had two specific vendors come in with their proposed technologies that they could implement in obtaining additional data and information on the pipelines that could be put into essentially a condition-based assessment. Also, one thing we have discussed with a number of other municipal entities on how do they tackle capital programs and approaches to replacing water lines. So just as a few examples, City of Conroe, City of Baytown, Austin, Sugar Land, Lake Jackson, just to name a few that we have started discussions on what are other similar entities to us doing for their programs.
Because one thing we want to note, to some degree, we're starting a new capital program when you think about it. We've got a whole bunch of infrastructure that is aging, that we're having some challenges with. And what do different cities and municipalities do as they begin to look at this? Many of them have been dealing with it for years. So how do they handle it? So we're not in this alone. There's a lot of resources that we can call. So we've been calling lots of folks around the state.
So 4 primary things we're going to go through in the next few slides is opportunistic sampling. Both uncontrolled and controlled, which I'll explain, but also opportunities for destructive testing and non-destructive testing. And then regardless of really any of the approaches we take, there's an engineering analysis that needs to happen. That partly is an upfront engineering analysis of bringing out a consultant to tell us, what is our best approach at doing this condition assessment? What tests should we be doing? How much of these tests? So tonight, Connie's going to get into our best knowledge to date, but really we would need a consultant to further lay that program out for us. And then the back end engineering analysis of, all right, now we collected all this data. How do we make sense of it? And how does that lead into a revised prioritization plan? So opportunistic sampling on the uncontrolled side, this is when pipes break. So we have continued to improve our documentation and what we're recording for data when we have pipe breaks. We have an official template now with it's a couple pages long of data that we would be collecting on a pipe break, looking at the soils in the area. Was there deflection in the pipe? Did it break at a joint? Did it break at a valve, or was it hit by a third party? Just any of those observations, along with capturing the cost. Was there damage to private property due to the break? And then capturing it, all that data and location in GIS, so we can bring up the maps and the information and have that organized. We also are beginning to, when we do have breaks, having opportunistic sampling. So having opportunities to take a small section of pipe out of ground and have that tested in a laboratory. We can note the embedment, note the damages as these happen. So this is a program that we would be working with the operations team and progressing as we have pipe breaks in the future. So other opportunistic sampling is on the controlled side. So there's 2 upcoming projects, one being the town center water line. So this is an opportunity that we would have to, as we're replacing the line, to take sections out and have those samples tested. And at that point in time, you could maybe compare, at least get some sort of sense of those results, but also it could tie back to who was the contractor that installed it, how old that line is, and you might be able to obtain some useful data from that opportunistic controlled sampling. One that y'all may not be fully familiar with is Harper's Landing water line. This is essentially a small section of water line up in Harper's Landing Trade Center east of 45 and 139 that we're adding a loop for redundancy in the line there. So this is something that has just hit 100% final design, and we're looking to bid that out in the next upcoming months. But it is
tying into an AC line, which is part of one of the package, the 11 packages on the map that you could refer to today. It's further out in our current 10-year project plan, but it is an opportunity where we would have a section of AC pipe exposed and could take a sample of that pipe and have it tested.
So to be clear, if y'all look up here at this map, I've got a green pointer, and you're looking at your 11 by 17, it would be up in this area. So up,
Yeah, it's the yellow section.
Yeah.
yes. So we'd be,
Purple section, number
It's
39 up here.
it's the yellow
Up
line
on-
on the map, though.
Up here,
Here on this one.
Yeah.
it's just in that general area.
yes.
We're not replacing the yellow line in there. It's just not right now. That's not what Harper's Landing is. It's just a project to loop that system. You're gonna tie into that yellow line. So we might as well sample it while we're there.
Right, and that project is fully funded through our R&R program. There is a bond fund associated with that. To date, the town center water line has been funded through the R&R. Construction is not funded. At this point in time, that is something that we would need a bond for. So those are some opportunities for controlled sampling that we would see.
Dan, when do you think you would have the sample results on this AC tie-in for loop back?
So, I think someone's got to tell me exactly what we're testing for. There is a local lab that I think it would be within, if we were to take a sample, send it to the lab, it would be probably within a couple months.
So early next year.
Depending on when the contractor actually chooses to tie in the line.
Yeah, so, and with our process on the procurement, we're looking to advertise this in the near future, next month or two. We usually have that out for advertisement for 30 days. It takes probably another 30 days to 2 months, depending on the timing, to get to our board for approval. And it might be another month or so to even get started. So this construction of this line probably won't even start till early next year. So it would, we'll say results by next summer if we were to do testing.
How old is that AC line at Harper's?
So that one is back on the table. It's the trade center section.
1977. so there.
1977.
There you go.
So it's actually a year older than the town center water.
Yeah, well, they were not part of the Woodlands Water or JPA. They had their own sewer treatment plant, their own water system. And then we approved to bring them into, they were run by San Jacinto River Authority, but they weren't part of the Woodlands Water. Okay, Harper's Landing. And after we brought them in, we were told they had their own treatment plant, their own water system, and then they aborted their treatment plant, built a new one, as I recall, and then they tied it in underneath the highway. So we incurred tremendous costs that were not anticipated at the time that they joined the JPA, now WWA.
That is a great history lesson that I will want to talk to you about someday. Because I didn't know that, but we can keep moving here.
So the
Destructive test.
So the destructive testing side, so some more information on this. We would need to shut down the water line if we were to do destructive testing. Bypass to maintain service, that is essentially an above ground line to bypass the shutdown section to keep our water lines in service and serving customers. The approach would be to excavate down and replace about a 10 to 13 foot pipe segment. So that would be a full segment, kind of joint to joint, pull that out, and we would be able to test samples of that pipe. We could also bring in a geotech consultant to run soil samples and test on the soil, look at the embedment, the construction around the pipe. So what is getting a little bit more technical on the testing side. So what tests would we be running? Again, this would go back to the consultant that would potentially setting up this program to help us define that. But the number of the tests that we have talked about, we've read about in some of the articles that we've been provided. Some were done in the Mesa Water article, but you're looking at some stain testing to really look at, has there been degradation or softening of the pipe walls. You could crush the pipe. You could look at kind of an X-raying the pipe. It's energy dispersive X-ray, to where you could also do chemical analysis and look at the carbonation of the pipe, and is that degrading the inner or outer walls. So ultimately, you're getting to a number of tests to get to the point where you would have the wall thickness, the remaining wall thickness defined. You would have some strength properties, the hardness of the pipe, and the internal external degradation from laboratory testing on those pipe samples. So on the non-destructive side, I do want to say, we're calling it non-destructive, but there is interruptions. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there standards that you can compare the test results to so that you'll know, all right, well, this is still fine. It's fine for 5 years. It's fine for 20 years, or we need to replace it.
So yes, they would be going back and looking at, all right, well, that pipe, when it was installed, the thickness, should have been X. It is now Y. But also, I think they could compare the results of the other testing they have and kind of standards set on just I guess more the chemical property side, the degradation of or softening of the wall.
There are standards for the testing, and the folks that are the experts in this, they know what would need to be specified. And so that's something that we as SRA don't have that expertise. So we would want to make sure we have that consultant that will make sure that we get that. We're just letting y'all know this wall thickness, strength, hardness, internal, external degradation. That's kind of what they're testing for. That's the type of results we'll have. And that will help us define that prioritized list and the changes and the schedule that it will go by as we move forward, if we're doing destructive testing. Does that answer your question, Carl?
So on the non-destructive side, like I mentioned, there is still some interruptions that would be occurring to do this non-destructive testing. So there would be sections based on the technology used that you would still be shutting down the water line, and you would want to propose an above ground bypass to keep water in service to the customers. Depending on the technology, like I mentioned, we've had a few vendors come in. One, again, going back to that Mesa, California article, is there's a technology from Mueller called Ecologics ePulse, and it's essentially connecting at 2 points on the pipe. There's potential you may be able to connect to the hydrants, but they're limited to 700 feet at a time for testing the pipe. And what they're doing is basically sending an acoustical wave through that pipe, and the velocity of that wave is measured to essentially get to an average stiffness of that pipe over a certain segment. And then beyond me, but the technical analysis of that data would lead to, all right, the degradation of pipe or the remaining wall thickness. But again, it is an average. It's you could have a small section of really bad pipe and the rest of it probably in good shape. So you might get some skewedness when you're testing over longer segments. There is also other technology that was presented to us that you would be actually putting a testing equipment within the pipeline, basically a foam cylinder, or they call it a pig, that you could send through the line. And they're saying it would also be able to not only determine wall thickness, leaks that you may be having, or seepage in the lines, but also joint separations or deflection in the pipe, usually using basically a GPS monitor on that equipment. But again, that is more costly and more intrusive by shutting down line, actually building ports to get that equipment in there and sending it through. So again, number of technologies out there, just kind of throwing out.
Back to that question, I guess my point is, it sounds like even if we do all this testing, there's still going to be some subjective analysis from our consultants that say, well, yeah, there's this degradation or whatever, but we really don't know for sure how many more years it's good for. But so we think our best guess is whatever, 10 more years or 5 more years.
Yeah.
So
At the end of the day, yes.
Yeah. There's engineering judgment that goes into this based on their expertise and their experience. You know, the other thing is that you're doing destructive testing. We're gonna get into how many and how much and all that sort of stuff here in a second, but, you know, you're extrapolating from there. You're taking one data point, couple data points along the line, and you're assuming that it's the same everywhere. With non-destructive testing, if you're doing the e-pulse that we talked about, which is, you know, potentially connected to fire hydrants and running a pulse through it, you're getting an average across that 700 feet, not a very clear picture of what's happening in certain spaces. If you did the pig that he was talking about, the little foam bullet that you could shoot through, you would get to see what's happening along the linear length. But to be clear, that's a European technology that's only been used once in the United States. And so there's a lot of limitations to it right now too. It has to be on transmission lines. If you have a lot of taps, it doesn't work. So there's some things like that we've got to consider. And so we're presenting the information that we have today, but there's still a lot of assumptions that go into any of this. So with all of that, there's an engineering analysis, and that's what comes up next here.
There's definitely pros and cons to every technology or method for non-destructive or destructive testing. Again, the engineering analysis, would really be the back-end engineering analysis where we're getting a geotech consultant on board to take those soil samples and test them. We've talked a little bit in the past about predictive modeling. So there's been some softwares thrown around. One is called Fracta. Another one is PipeRank. But utilizing these softwares, that's where you really start putting all the data and compiling it in there and through whatever algorithms they're using, but also it's really defining, all the data is defining what is the likelihood of failure. And it's not just, you know, age-based or previous breaks. You know, you're going to have a number of other metrics that go into that spreadsheet. And how are you going to weight them? You know, what goes back to level of service? You know, what are the tipping points on those to where you say, all right, this is to replace or not because it meets these criteria. You know, so someone needs to set those metrics, set the weighting, set the criteria, set the trigger points. How is it ends up being prioritized? So really, that's all going to roll into the output eventually being the prioritized and reschedule project plan for replacement of water lines.
We're gonna pause again. Any questions on the sampling or the testing portion of this? Yes, sir.
Okay, you mentioned you approached some other entities about what they're doing to replace their asbestos cement pipe. Did they share with you what they are using for the expected useful life of the AC pipes in their system?
No, sir. I mean, no, they didn't. And many of them, it's they don't even have an asset management plan like what we do. They don't even have a report or anything to base it off of. Many of them, it's based off of they've got a problem and it's been consistent enough that their city council wants solutions. And so it's the hottest potato that they've got to go take care of. And it doesn't matter that there's maybe a bigger issue somewhere else. It's the thing that's in their face. And so that's much of the plan. Like City of Austin does do some asset management. They've got a much more robust program. They use a technology called Smart Ball, which is, once again, it's not the bullet, it's a ball of sorts, and you have to have a port to put it in. But once again, if you have a lot of the taps and things off of it, there's some limitations and it's very expensive. But they use that to help. But they haven't given me any dates, Mr. Gaynor.
So the management method is by reaction, instances.
Yes, sir. It's very reactive. What I will tell you is the conversations I've had with engineers that are in the greater Houston area who've been doing work for probably 30 plus years in the Houston area is specifically City of Houston based. And that 50-year lifespan is about how long the AC pipe lasted in Houston. And our understanding is that the installation methods were very similar. So using native soils, placing it there and then sort of leaving it. And with the movements and the droughts and the wet and the just expansive clays that they have and that are similar here, they had some significant issues in the 90s and had to do some very major replacements. And that was about a 50-year lifespan on that AC pipe. And so honestly, between that and the EPA, that's really where that 2015 original number that we use as 50 comes from, is because that's what we've seen, historically what we've heard. But, you know, if we're moving forward with some of this, we can have some other data that can help us.
and you mentioned the EPA, you mentioned the city of Houston. And can you provide written reports detailing that information? There's a lot of information out there that point to 80 million years. And 80 years is poor installation, poor soil. That's what the AWWA says. And you know, they have a handbook called the Condition Assessment of Water Main Lines, M77.
Yes, sir.
And, you know, there's a lot of literature. It's not something that's new. It's been going on a long time. It's just the problem is we've neglected to use it here. Right? We neglected. We just made a guess at 50 years. Right? We made a guess. There's nothing you provided that says 50 years, is there?
At this point, sir, we were not here when
I-
that document was created.
I'm talking about the body.
So the
Yeah.
body doesn't have the document that might have been used to do that. My understanding, based on the available information at the time in 2015, and then I think there was an update in 2020, but that 50 years came from their understanding from the EPA, which is the regulatory entity, which is not a WWA. Yes, they are a standard in the industry, and we are very respectful of AWWA. EPA also has some standards that we have to consider. We took a conservative approach on it and used the 50 years, taking in data of other people that is not written down, but other folks in the industry who are very much so in the know and understand what happened at the city of Houston and how reactive they had to become because of failures of the AC pipe.
You know,
I think the other point too about Houston is they did react and they waited so long that now they'll never catch up. Now they're so busy repairing, you know.
Yeah, there's an
problems.
article that's out that even came out this week. They're reacting now to challenges with
The
PVC.
question is, if
You know.
you replace pipe reactively late in its life cycle, you know, an emergency basis, you would expect that the cost to do that would be a lot higher than being proactive and replacing it, you know, when on our terms, on our schedule, as opposed to at night, you know, in bad weather because something broke underneath the freeway.
It's always more expensive if you're in an emergency.
so, Rex for 100 miles, let's get back to that. Right, Rex for 100 miles. You don't have the numbers.
Wait a second.
You don't
Can we,
have to-
can we finish this, please?
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
So
I thought you were finished.
It was a question, it was a Q&A session.
Yeah,
Oh, no, I just would continue the discussion. That's all I was going to do. But
well, I hadn't completed my question. I would like the opportunity to do that. I ask you not to interrupt me again.
I think the gentleman down there interrupted you, not me. I'm just saying that. I thought you were finished.
Okay. So, under opportunistic sampling, control or uncontrolled. Now that we know we're in this 50-year period, roughly, when a lot of pipe was installed in the 70s, obtaining information on construction records, design versus actual, or design versus actual, how it was actually done, and what condition the pipe is in, and the embedment, the whole 9 yards. How are you going to relate these things to make a reasonable assessment, to make a forecast from your sample locations out along the length of the pipeline?
That's one of the things that the consultant will help us with, to be honest with you, that there's an upfront engineering analysis that has to be done to kind of help with where any of this would occur.
Mhm.
And now, one of the reasons that with the, what I would call the controlled, we're looking at the 10 to 15 foot sample. It's really, and I'm not finding it right now, destructive testing, the 10 to 13 feet is because we'd like to see what did they do from joint to joint instead of it just being a small coupon. We want to see what they did, and let's just go ahead and replace it while we're there. And at the end of the day, that consultant will help us with the breakdown of all the different projects and where they were installed. We're going to do our best to know who the contractors were, best information that we have from the developer on that information, and then we'll decide where these tests are done, and then they'll tie it back together, Mr. Gainer.
I think regardless if you go non-destructive or destructive testing, you're gonna have an excavation where you'll be able to see that.
Yeah, I understand. Now, there's another question that's sort of floating in the background here. Hazardous material handling protocols for asbestos.
It is handled by the Department of Health and Safety at the state level, and we will have to follow all of those procedures. Yes, sir.
And that's just for this sampling exercise.
For any of the replacement that we do, we will have to follow that.
Okay. The predictive modeling, the engineering analysis, the last slide, it's one. That modeling software, is that specifically designed for asbestos cement pipe?
I think most of them are utilized through a wide variety of pipeline materials and not specifically for AC pipe, but it has been utilized for AC.
For AC pipe, okay. All right, thank you.
Any questions on sampling or testing?
I'll wait to the end.
All right, so one of the questions that we figure you have is how much should we do? We looked at this approach and we've had conversations once again with a handful of national experts on this. So one of them was from the Mesa, California study. Another one is one that's more local here that we've dealt with on this. And then we've had another national expert that has come to the table and helped provide us information. So what we're trying to do with this, how much is proposed, we're trying to come up with a budget, an idea of what we can do to kind of help corral this, because you can continue to test and test and test and test and test to have more data, but at some point we have to put a budget to it. And so for that, we began to make some assumptions. So we're going to look at this in terms of maximums of things, okay? So the maximum destructive testing that we've heard from our national experts that we really should do is 1 sample per mile. If you don't include town center in the sampling, so you're assuming that you're going to do opportunistic sampling, town center is about 3 miles. So if you looked at the PowerPoint, it said there was, I think, 48 miles. Well, there's 45 miles left. Okay, so assuming that we're going to have 45 miles, that's 45 total locations. So if you look at the screen, please don't hold me to these red dots. This is for schematic purposes only. This is about what 45 testing locations would look like. That would be roughly a mile apart on the pipe. So you'll see that they're scattered throughout. Once again, town center is not included on that, but you're trying to gather a good amount of data across the Woodlands system. Looking at non-destructive, once again, town center not being included, it's less of a rule of thumb here from talking to the national experts. 25 miles is about what they would recommend for what we've got right now. If we get a consultant on board, it might be less, but we assume that 25 would be the maximum. So once again, if you look here, there's some black squiggly lines. That's roughly 25 miles of pipe. So those assumptions assume you would probably do one or the other. The engineering analysis will have to happen regardless. You're going to need it in any testing scenario. So from how much are you proposing, engineering analysis has to happen for both. That's pretty quick speed through there on the maximum amounts, but any questions on the maximum amounts and where they came from or how they apply? All right, we're gonna keep moving then. Uh-oh, okay.
Were to follow these consultants and experts that you've spoken with and did the maximum testing, what confidence level do you have in the product, in the answer? In other words, are you at 90% confidence level that you have good data?
Of the overall system.
Yes.
I'm not sure I can put a percentage on it, to be honest with you.
That gets to the point of we continue to test forever and maybe never reach 90%.
We'll have more data and it will be a better assumption to work from. But I couldn't tell you if it's 90%, 70%. I mean, it's an assumption. You're extrapolating based on the best information that you have, which is what we're doing today as well.
But wouldn't your base knowledge be tremendously improved what you have today?
It will definitely be better. Cannot argue that. Yes, sir.
And I'm an engineer. In engineering, we deal with a lot of unknown.
Yes,
By the time we, deal with the exact everything, you wouldn't get out that front door.
Right.
Right, you wouldn't get out the
We
front
can't
door.
have paralysis from analysis, right? At some point you gotta cut me.
We're going from a situation now in which we have no data. You've admitted that, repeatedly. We have no data. And we're talking about ripping out what appears by AWWA standards, a perfectly good pipe that may have 30 to 50 years more.
We're talking about getting that data though. That's what she's talking about now. You've made your point.
No, your point's been very well and eloquently made, Trustee
I
Smith.
also would like to clarify, we do have some data. It's not a lot of data.
You gave me the.
It's not a lot of data, but we do have some data. And we also have some public response to those incidents. We have a level of service that's expected in the Woodlands. And because of the data, even though they may not be a lot in certain people's estimation, there is an impact. There's a reputation impact. There is an understanding that there are breaks that continue. And so it's really not SRA's place to say whether or not that's too much or too little. If y'all feel that those pipes need to be replaced because there's a public pushback on it, that's a level of service that we want to provide to you. If y'all feel like it's not enough, we can continue to gather more data to provide the science for it. But that's as much a policy decision as it is our recommendation.
So, if we go back to breakage, the data you have,
Yes, sir.
and we look at breakage per 100 miles.
Okay.
Why? Why are we doing this? They're trying to tell us we're gonna get the data. We're going to get the data.
Going to get the data.
You've made your point. We're gonna get the data. One way or the other, we're gonna get it. We need
A
it.
few more slides to
We have
get through.
more slides.
Yeah, let's go ahead and we've got some recommendations here. So let's push through this. Engineering analysis, we're going to need engineering analysis. I think we've all established that. Our recommendation right now is to assume do half and half. So with the studies that we've reviewed, having conversations with consultants, honestly, they all kind of approach this a little differently. Some of them say maybe you should just do all destructive testing. Some say we lean on non-destructive testing because it's faster to do, which sometimes people say it's not faster to do. But what we also know is that you could go in and do non-destructive testing and figure out the best places that there's already breaks or there's already some challenges, and let's go destructive test there and prioritize that. You could say instead, look, we already know that there's some issues in the system. Let's go destructive test there and then go back and figure out if there's other places. There's a lot of ways to go about this and a lot of ways to, have fun and skin a cat. So at the end of the day, that prioritized and scheduled project plan is what we want from this. But we think that if you do half and half, at least budgetarily, and then allow a consultant to help us, that's kind of where we're standing right now. So with that, if you once again want to look at the map of what that could look like, I want to point out that the black lines, there's less of them. The red dots, there's less of them. Some, you might have a black line and a red dot together. Some, you may have a red dot without any black lines around it. And then some places you may have a black line with no red dots. That's something that a consultant will help us with. So the end goal being that this list will be updated. We don't expect necessarily that this list will stay in the same order or the replacement years remain the same. I think I stated at the very beginning, it was never our intent necessarily that these have to stay there. We were always intending to continue to update this list as we got more information and more data. And we have been collecting more and better data since 2015 when we really started our asset management plan. So with that, we are committed to continuing to prioritize this regardless of the outcome of what we're doing with asset management and these testings.
And it wouldn't be just, hey, we're gonna do a condition-based program and then we're gonna update it one time. It would be an ongoing, reoccurring, probably at least annual reprioritization as data continues to come in.
It'd be a
As we continue to have, additional breaks, collect data from that.
So at the end of the day, I want to point out a little asterisk up here because our recommendation is completely based on the fact that we're going to need to hire some consultants. So we need a condition-based RFQ for a consulting engineer, a contractor that's going to dig those holes and provide temporary water. So just as a reminder, when you do these tests, you do have to take the water line out of service. We want to maintain your service. In some places, there's not loops. The water goes one direction. We need to make sure that water stays in service. And then we need an RFQ for a testing lab to make sure that we have the appropriate people on tap to do our testing when we need it. So that's our recommended combination. Yes, sir.
And on your last slide,
Yes, sir.
what is the estimated cost of those?
The next,
Woo-woo, you're going right forward. So I'm going to pause and we'll get to that as the next thing. Does anybody else have any questions on our breakdown of how we came up with the recommendation of half and half? Moving on. How long will it take and how much will it cost? Right? There we go. Building 2. So estimated schedule, we do think that once again, this is kind of a maximum kind of feel. So depending on the consultant, depending on the plan, depending on what we put together, estimated schedule about 4 years. So hypothetically, if we started and everything lined up and we could get started in January of 2024, we'd complete in January 2028. So that is an estimated schedule. And the estimated cost would be about $3.5 million. So that would include engineering analysis, the contractor to excavate any of the pits, do the temporary water and replace any pipe that we pull out, geotechnical boring and analysis, the actual destructive testing and the non-destructive testing.
Part of the reason we've got January 2024 on there is if you say go forward, we've got to put an RFQ, as Connie mentioned earlier, we've got to put an RFQ out to solicit statement of qualifications from engineers and contractors. And so as mentioned, it takes about 3 to 4 months to go through that process and get somebody under contract. So 4 months puts us pretty close to the end of the year. That's why we're saying start January. Assuming there's money available.
And so I want to note, this is assuming half and half. If we went full destructive or full non-destructive, it's maybe a $200,000 difference being lower. So we took the worst case scenario kind of budget number for it. But I will tell you, it doesn't swing the pendulum far.
Ask on several of these pages here, you have got town center not included.
Yes, sir.
What's being addressed for town center?
That's going to come up in the next steps here. So any other questions on the cost and schedule, and then we'll get to what we're proposing for the next step. And then we'll just move on. The next steps. So Estuary is definitely committed to continuing any opportunistic testing that we can have. So any future line breaks, we will be doing our best to do all the sampling and the things that you heard from us in that uncontrolled testing scenario. Discussing the condition-based assessment at the August MUD board meeting. So we know that's something that we're going to be doing here. And then what we're proposing here is at the September MUD meetings, and it can be September, it can be whenever Eric and company, you all may want to do it, but considering to take action on a $25 million bond funding for the following. So here is the construction of Town Center Waterline Project. So we would plan to perform opportunistic testing during construction. And that would be roughly a $15.5 million budget item there. Preliminary engineering for North Town Center Grogan's Mill water line. So that's one of the next projects. If you go back to the LEN studies next project, so that's roughly $2 million for preliminary engineering. Preliminary engineering for the Panther Creek area water. So it's the third project on that list, another $2 million. The condition-based assessment, assuming we want to move forward with that, that's $3.5 million, and then capitalized interest adds up to the $25 million bond that we've kind of identified. So the next slide just says any questions, so I'm probably going to pause here on this slide.
We're not looking for a decision tonight. We're putting the information out in front of you. Happy to talk about it at the MUD meeting next week and also at the September meeting. And with hopes that no later than October, the decision could be made on how to proceed.
Will this be available for the MUD presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Outstanding presentation. Thank you.
Is it an option to do, instead of maybe the 25 million, do a 20 million where you maybe pull out those preliminary engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just our proposal. Honestly, what we would propose as Estuary is to continue moving forward, once again, with preliminary design of the next steps. So kind of running two things side by side. If we're going to move forward with condition-based assessment, which we are recommending, as engineers, I don't disagree with you, Mr. Smith. We would love to have more data. And we would love to prioritize this to make sure that y'all feel comfortable with what we're doing and that y'all can go into the community and into this program to the ratepayers. If we're doing that, we would run them in parallel. And so if we have a 4-year window by January of 2028, we would be probably done with the designs for the next two. But if we get data early on, which we probably would do, is prioritize the data for your North Town Center Grogan's Mill and your Panther Creek to make sure that, hey, if we get some information that's destructive or non-destructive that shows that that's in good shape, maybe we move on to the next one, pause on that and move forward. But no sense in wasting time. If you're going to get good data that says that it maybe is compromised, let's just keep going. So we're going to propose to run everything in parallel. Most cities do that. Most cities, if they have an asset management plan and they're gathering information, they continue to move forward with their capital plans. And then they update if something changes drastically in the field and they find something else out, they'll reprioritize. And sometimes they'll shelve engineering.
So that 4 million that we spend on engineering, if we decide the data shows that, hey, we can push this 20 years farther out, have we just wasted 4 million on that preliminary engineering?
No. I mean, I think that the basic understanding of what's going to occur is we're trying to document, the basic, where we're going to bore, how we're going to look at things, what's the costs for it, initial geotech, which we can use to put back into our modeling and the data that we're gathering. So to me, you're not wasting any money. And if we get in there and we're only, $200,000 in a preliminary design and we find data that shows that it would, otherwise need to be shelved, we would just stop.
Why don't we take the town center water line? And since we have no data, the science in the industry says 80 to 100 years. Why don't we stop that project and begin with that project, taking samples, you need to determine its true life. Because right now, we don't know its true life. And again, I've been wanting to say this number, so in using the data that you all provided to me, which you said that was the complete set of data, our breakage rate per 100 miles is 5 breaks per 100 mile per year, right? The Mesa, Arizona breaks were 4.5, and their pipeline was 10 years older than ours. You look at AWWA, looking at the Mesa article, they say the expected service level at AWWA is 13 and a half years. Right, 13 and a half breaks per mile per year. So I'm just saying, we should not be in a rush to do this stuff. And $25 million is a lot of money.
There are some other reasons to pursue town center. Part of town center water line has a upgrade of 6-fan 12-inch to a 16-inch. We need that for capacity.
So, but
Let me finish, please.
okay.
It is part of that project. Now, could it be stripped out and done separately? Yes. But we do have data. You're refusing to acknowledge the data that we do have.
What data do you have?
We have breaks on that section. We have outages in that section where businesses have been out of business overnight because water line breaks.
Can you provide that in a written form? Okay. I mean,
It happened in March of 2020.
but one break
No,
doesn't make.
let me finish. That one break put 5 restaurants and a movie theater out of business for 24 hours
So, okay, so,
on a Friday night.
well, I understand that, but that doesn't mean that we spent $25 million to solve that problem. We look at the picture as a whole, we make decisions. You yourself told me, right, that you have no understanding. You have no understanding of how you affect your customers, and this gentleman here has no understanding how you affect them.
I do know.
You should be talking to each other. You have no measurement of this. I've never seen any data. You have what I call inference data, right? Oh, I remember this happening.
I was
That's not
there.
how.
Trustee Smith,
I agree
please.
with you, but-
Trustee Smith, please. You've expressed yourself very clearly and very eloquently. And Trustee McIntosh?
Let me get the timeline straight here. The briefing will be available to the MUDs
Yes, sir.
at their meeting this month. And you would like an approval next month of this recommendation.
If that is.
That's the way I hear it.
I think I suggested no later than the October trustee meeting.
Yes, but you see, there's no reason to postpone it. We could have, okay, let's say we have questions that can be offered by the MUDs on this presentation. And then we will have those at the WWA next month. And the approval date or denial of approval should come the next month. Is that sufficient? Is that Good enough for you?
Yeah.
Does anyone have objections to that? Does that sound like something you could live with?
Obviously, I support the ACP approach. I mean, and, obviously I have reservations with this table.
Please, ACP.
I
What is
support
ACP?
ACP, you know,
Asset condition
activity-based
plan, yeah.
analysis for the pipeline. I don't
Condition
support
based.
age-based.
Okay,
I would recommend that we approve that timeline that says the MUDs get it this month. They can ask questions. It will be addressed at our WWA meeting. And the following month, we will approve or disapprove these recommendations.
September.
You're saying the
Yeah.
vote in October and discussion in September?
I'm saying next month we have questions.
Mhm.
So this is August, that's September. So that means the October meeting,
Vote in October.
we will have a final decision on these recommendations.
But you all will get to see Dan and I, we're gonna present this entire presentation at every MUD meeting over the next week.
Now,
I think it's
I would
reasonable.
recommend we approve that timeline.
Know that you can do that. It's not on the agenda. That's not an agenda item to approve on, to vote on that. So you need to.
No, just a consensus. Obviously, it's not an agenda item.
I think it's a reasonable approach. Measured
We can
and
have it as an
reasonable.
agenda item for the final approval next month.
Sure. Thank you.
That's the end of our agenda
Thank
here.
you.
So any other questions or things, y'all feel free to come find us if y'all want to call us pedestrian. We're happy to help.
Forward your questions to Eric. He'll pass them on.
Correct.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, Dan and Connie.
And the MUD should have written questions. If you have questions, they should be written. I would think.
We would appreciate that. Written questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
That line.
Hour and 5 minutes.
These are not whole punched.
Oh, you got a red line copy, bless your heart. We looked at this and we went, wait a second. This looks way too familiar.
Welcome to Woodlands Water.
I don't kidding.
You having fun yet?
First trustee meeting. Figure out what they really mean. It's a 200-page bill.
Yeah.
Take that.
All right, I know we've got to run along, so I'll keep it brief. Nothing of a general nature under the attorney's reports this evening. Happy to answer questions if you have them. Otherwise, I'll move on to food sink. Item 14, the policy number director 20. This is to update the fees of office to reflect House Bill cleanup items related to budget districts and management districts. One of those items was to update the director fees office that was in the set of flat 150, not adjusted for inflation. The omnibus bill updated that revision to now tie it to what state legislators are paid, and that is determined by the Texas Ethics Commission. So we have updated your policy that deals with director per diems to include that language from the bill that passed to tie what directors in Woodlands are paid for per diem to the amount set by the Ethics Commission. So you'll see that in the first and second paragraphs there.
I see our per diem went to per annum.
No, it's per diem, and then at the end, it's still a maximum of $7,200 per annum. That's per year. So right now, the amount for legislators is $221, but it doesn't change the maximum $7,200. So you're still capped out at that.
So we're not gonna say 221 and
Correct.
where it said
Correct.
150?
So that way we don't have to come back and amend this every time the ethics commission changes. We're doing that for all the district clients.
How often does it change? I mean, it's been 150 for the last 15 or 20 years.
No, I'm talking how often the state legislator speed changes, I don't know, we haven't tracked that, but that's what it'll be tied to.
So this is a new thing it's practiced. Okay.
Correct.
That's usually through my cost of living.
And what would you like approval on?
This policy, and it will be, so one other item, if you go back to page 2, we also added language not related to 2815, but to take into account the fact that there are virtual conferences now that that directors can attend. We've had boards, you can, we have specific language in here that authorizes virtual participation in conferences if you choose to do that as opposed to in person. So we're going to go ahead and formalize that to the policy law for update. That's it.
I move approval.
We have a motion for approval of the revised DIR 20, Director's Fees of Office Allowances and Expenses. We have a second. I'll second the motion. We have a motion and a second. To further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, receive the general manager's report, agenda item 15.
Yes, just a couple quick things, and then a third thing that we'll take in closed session. But the first two things I wanted to just make you aware of is we've been negotiating and discussing with a company that specializes in coming in and essentially doing an audit of how you're billing, how your meters are set up, and essentially the way it works is if they find any lost revenues that might be there in the system, either physical, external situations, wrong meters, wrong billing, or internal billing, or things like that. They split the revenue that you're losing today with you, so you get it. We're going to be entering into a contract with them. There's no cost to us. It's just whatever they find, we split, and it's a 3-year deal. So I'm going to be executing that. We're going to be moving forward with that. Brian and his office have helped us review the contract. It helped us review the contract, and we're in good shape as far as the legality of everything. I think we feel good about it. The other thing I had was, as a precursor, we have been working on a retail rate study, and we're going to be presenting that to the MUDs next week. I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up that that's what's been going on. While you've asked about it a couple times. And my understanding is the general sense is that the MUDs would prefer to have uniform rates across as many MUDs as we can. Is that kind of my understanding?
So we've got historical.
Yeah, there's 2 MUDs that aren't currently right now, but we'll try to continue to keep the others in line.
It's usually complicated to maintain that.
70 years
Common across that.
to get it that way, and then
Yeah, could we modify, I mean, let's say my mic would want to say later, we need to change it. Would we be restricted to changing it?
No,
We could move that rate. You're recommending we all keep it the same. I can understand why,
yes,
but we could move it. We're not restricted to moving it in the future.
correct. You could move it.
We could move it in the future by full vote.
Yes, the last time your retail rates changed was 9 years ago, 2014. There's never been a rate study to this magnitude with this much data and analysis that's been done in the past, never been done here. So you're going to see a lot of data and effort that was put into putting these rates together. It accounts for a lot of things, including a couple of districts that financially are having a little bit of issue. So there's some makeup there. And so unfortunately, the way that the finances are for all the MUDs, they're just not possible at this point to get all 10 MUDs at all the same rates. 8 of them would be, as they are now. So just wanted to confirm that's kind of where we've been, and that's kind of where we want to continue to stay if we can. Is that fair? Yes.
Question on your comment about the last rate increase was 2014. I'd like to specify that the last water rate retail increase was 2014.
Retail, good point.
And
Retail.
the wastewater retail rates
Right.
most recently have been upgraded to the actual cost, wholesale cost to the MUDs, beginning about 2 years ago. So
Correct.
that's where we are now.
I was thinking, yes, retail markets. That's correct.
Did you build that recommendation into the budget you're handing out next week? You did. Okay.
So those are the 2 items I had, and then there's another item we'll take in closed session when the time comes. That's all I had.
Thank you. Agenda item 16, receive staff or ad hoc committee updates on the following personnel committee. Personnel committee, Kyle.
We had a personnel committee meeting today prior to this meeting. And really, I can't get into any details. That's what we're gonna be talking about in closed session. So
Yes,
we'll
but
talk
there
about
was a
the details.
meeting and it will be discussed. The actions of that meeting will be discussed in closed session.
All matters.
Personnel. Thank you. Audit and Finance Committee, Paul.
We met, 2 of us met. Ron Wilson, our chair, is traveling out of the country and is not available. But we met on August 7th, Monday, and to review what you just saw, the AC water pipe testing presentation. So we get to do it again next week. And then secondly, on that same meeting date, we reviewed the WWA preliminary operating budget and capital budget for fiscal year 24. Again, that was the same that was presented today.
Thank you. Public Education Committee, Neil.
Oh, there's no update.
Very good. Thank you. We will now recess to closed session.